Good morning. And thank you guys again for having me again. So I cherish the privilege of getting to come and present the word to you guys this morning. And this morning I get to actually talk about one of my favorite passages, which is found in Luke chapter 9, verses 57 through 62. So if you have a Bible or if you have a Bible app and you want to follow along, you can. Otherwise, it's going to be on the screen. But I love this passage because it gets to talk that the cost of Jesus is great. Following Jesus is costly. And I want to make sure we repeat that because I don't think that sometimes we always understand that following Jesus is costly. Now think back. I'm sure we could all think of times where there's something that we really, really want to do and we'd spend money on that no matter what it was, right? So when I was 16, I got introduced to the great Nicolas Cage movie Gone in 60 Seconds, and I fell in love with the Shelby GT 500. It's my dream car. And I was out shopping with my mom one day, and we went to Best Buy, because it was still a thing back then, and I saw a 1969 Shelby GT 500 with the for sale sign in the window. And I was like, Mom. So we jotted down the number. I called the number, and the guy's like, yeah, I want $25,000 for the car. My mom said no. And mind you, when we saw the car, it was white. It was like primer white, and there was rust everywhere, and you could see through the floor to the ground under. So the $25,000 for the car was great. Not to say like the other $30,000 that would had to be put into it, and my mom was like, "Yeah, no, that's never gonna happen." But I really wanted it, and I think back about when I got married to my wife. I loved my wife, and we went ring shopping, and she found the ring that she was in love with, and it was on sale, and she's like, "You have to get it," and I was like, "No, you deserve full price," and I almost didn't get married that day. But I went back and I got the ring because it was the ring that she wanted, and it was worth the price, right? And the wives or females, I'm sure you probably remember wedding dress shopping, and there were just things in your life that, man, you're just willing to go spend money on, right? Regardless of the cost, I'm gonna spend money on that. Now, mind you, I found my wife's wedding dress, and it was like way cheaper than what she was gonna spend. It was phenomenal, and she still looked amazing. So. You're welcome. And we've been married for 15 years, so like, guys, you could go wedding dress shopping too. But I've also shared with you guys, my wife and I, our journey with our little guy, Ryan. I love him, even at communion time, and he wants communion, he's throwing a fit. But my wife and I, we tried for 12 years to have our son. And we were told that we would never have kids. And it was because of a friend of Megan's, Alex, who introduced her to another person at a fundraiser where we found out about a doctor who could help us. And we conceived our son, Ryan, and it cost a lot of money. But he's worth every cent of it. And now we're just 6 months out from welcoming baby Jordan, and we can't wait to see her beautiful face when she comes. But, exactly. But as you guys know, or many of you, I'm sure probably are aware, kids are costly, right? Diapers, daycare. He is going to be a football player. I swear he is eating me out of a house. So food and clothes and, but all of it is worth it, right? And those are just some examples of things that cost us time and money and energy, and they're great. And we're willing to do whatever it is for those. So that's where our story leads us this morning. Is we're going to look at 3 different examples of the extent to the cost of following Jesus for us. And so this morning we're going to open up. We're going to start looking at the first guy that we find in this little parable in Luke chapter 9, verses 57 to 58. We read this about this encounter, okay? It says this. It says, as they were walking along the road, a man said to him, I will follow you wherever you go. And Jesus replies, foxes have dens, birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. So there Jesus is, right? Probably going to be on a very similar day to like today. It's hot, it's humid. Jesus is walking towards Jerusalem. They had a long day already, okay? So they started the day off. Jesus took his big three, Peter, James, and John, and they went to the mountaintop. They saw the transfiguration, and holy smokes, what an event that would have been just in itself. They healed a boy. They did a lot of different other various miracles and healings along the day. And here Jesus is, walking to go towards Jerusalem. And this guy is probably super excited to see Jesus, right? He's probably heard the stories of what's going on throughout the day. Jesus is doing healings. He's doing all these great things. And he's probably super excited to see Jesus. And he comes running up and he says, Jesus, I'll follow you wherever you go. And that's a pretty bold statement. And even bolder when we look at the fact that, Peter is with Jesus, and Peter said the exact same thing, and if we look down the road, Peter's the guy who said, I don't know Jesus, and he denies him 3 different times. But this guy says, Jesus, I'll follow you wherever you'll go. And then Jesus' response to it is, well, fox have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to go. And if you're like me, you're like, what? Like, if I'm that guy who's running and saying, Jesus, I'll follow you, and then this is what Jesus says, I would have been like, can you explain it to me a little bit? Like, I'm confused. Like, it seems confusing, and we don't talk that way, right? Like, if someone says, Steven, I'm going to follow you wherever you go, I'm going to be like, well, fox have dens and, birds have nests, but I have nowhere. Like, it just doesn't make sense. It's not what we would normally expect. And so Jesus is, saying, hey, like, I don't have any place to go, right? And Jesus was saying, I have no home. He's saying, hey, this stuff has homes, but I don't. And so what Jesus was saying, and what Jesus was trying to get this man and probably his followers and his disciples to understand at that time was, we got to let go of our earthly securities. Right? Foxes have their dens and they could go and run and they have some place cozy to go to. Birds have their little nest. And just this spring, by my front door, I have my little light, and these birds had their nest. And anytime I open up the door, the mama bird is like squawking at me, and she's like flying at my head. They have their safe place to go. But Jesus is saying, I don't have that. He was saying that the things of this world kind of hold us back, and he was telling this man and the disciples that we get ourselves so wrapped up into the world that we never consider the cost of Jesus, right? The world has this way of getting us to want to hold back and not follow Jesus, and so we don't really consider the cost. When Jesus was in Nazareth, where he was from, when he was home, the people there, they would be making fun of him, they would ridicule him, they would mock him, they denied him. Even Jesus' hometown didn't give him any sort of security. Jesus had no place to call home. And so he was asking this guy, are you sure? You got to give this up. And we do that so many different times in our own lives where we come to God and we lay down on his feet, but we kind of want to cling on to our earthly securities. So, whatever that may be, whether that's a career, if God's asking us to let go of that job, or, maybe it's some sort of possession, or maybe it's something that's holding us back, and God is saying we got to let it go. But are we willing to do it? And a lot of times we're not. I see that a lot, and where people, God's calling them to do something, and they're like, God, I can't do that. I remember when I moved to Montezuma, Iowa, and I was comfortable, and my wife and I prayed for a long time when the senior minister job opened up at the church I was at, and it became clear I wasn't going to get it. And I was comfortable, and I said, God, I'm comfortable. And he said, So, it's hard. It's hard to give up those securities where you're comfortable and you know what they are. And that's probably what the first guy's thinking, right? He's holding on to something, and Jesus knows he's holding on to something that he's secured by, he's comfortable with. And he's not willing to part ways. But the truth is, if we're going to follow Jesus, we have to be willing to get rid of that. We have to be willing to part ways and give up those earthly securities so that we can really consider the cost of following Jesus and really, truly dive into him. But the next guy, right? The next guy we see is in verses 59 and 60, and this is what happens there, right? And he said to another man, "Follow me." But he replied, "Lord, first let me go bury my father." And Jesus said, "Let the dead bury their own dead, but you go and proclaim the kingdom of God." And when I first read this as a young Christian, I was like, wow, that's pretty revolutionary. Jesus, like, wow, that's harsh. Especially when you first kind of read it, right? Like, guys, like, Jesus is like, hey, like, follow me. And the guy's like making a pretty simple request, like, hey, let me go bury my dad. And Jesus is like, let the dead bury their own dead. Like, no, come, let's go. And I just was like, wow, Jesus, that's harsh. Because it's a really reasonable request. I mean, we read it and it's kind of reads it as face value. The guy's dad probably just passed away, so let me go bury him and I'll go follow you. But the fact is that we don't really know whether or not the guy's dad actually really did pass away. And the fact that dad might have had many years left, and so the guy was like, well, after he dies, I'll go, okay? Like, I'll be willing to do that. And we know in Jewish custom was that when a family member passed away, they would bury them on a shelf with the rest of the family, and they would leave them there for a year, and they would mourn, and then after a year, they would come, and they would take the bones, and they would go bury the bones with the rest of the body. And so this guy could have legitimately had years before he was willing to go follow Jesus. But Jesus says, let the dead bury their dead. Jesus also says this in the book of Matthew in chapter 10 and verse 37. It says this. It says, anyone who loves their father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And again, it seems really harsh. It does. Like, so understand, I'm not trying to say that. But Jesus is saying that we have to be prepared to do his work. We have to be willing to take up his cross, and we have to be willing to bear with him and do what he's asked us to do. And that isn't to say families are bad, because families are great. I love my family. I love my wife's family, and I would do anything for them. But Jesus is calling us to go and do his work now, because that is what's more important. The cost of following Jesus is letting go of those who we surround ourselves who might try to hold us back. And Jesus calls us to be ready to do his work now. It isn't so that we can wait and I'll do it later, Jesus. It's fine. Like, I'll come and do it later when I'm ready. Jesus is saying now. And the point that Jesus is saying is, let the spiritual dead deal with the spiritual dead, okay? Like, let them bury the physical dead. If the spiritual dead are doing that, go. But I want you to follow me now. And too often in our world, I see where people are invited to follow Jesus. We have conversations, and then they're like, well, I can't right now. And I saw that when I was a youth pastor. It drove me nuts when I was a youth pastor. I worked in the schools, and I was involved with so many kids. And I would be like, hey, like, come on, like, let's go to church. And like we would have church conversations. We would have conversations about Jesus. And they'd be like, well, I'll follow Jesus, but like, you know, right now I like to party with my friends. So I want to go party with my friends, and I want to be able to drink on the weekends. And I know that if I follow Jesus, I have to stop that. And so, you know, once I get out of this phase, I'll follow Jesus. Or, you know, I'll do this, but my girlfriend, she's really important to me, and, you know, she's the one, and if I could slap kids for that one, I would. Gosh, I heard that one so many times. And the other one was, you know, I would, but I got you know, league on the weekends, and I got to play ball, and I'm going to make it big. buddy, you're probably not. I'm sorry. Ryan will, though. Ryan's going to be a quarterback for Nebraska, and he's going to be drafted number 1. I know that's God's will. I know. I get it. I know. But it's not likely to happen, right? It's not likely to happen. And so there'd be so many times I would have these conversations with kids, and they're like, well, I would, but I got this. And even as an adult, when I was a pastor, and now when I have conversations with people, and they're like, well, I really want to follow Jesus, but my kids, I got to focus on my kids right now, and I got to focus on my career, and I got to focus on my job, and I got to focus on that next party next weekend, and there's always something else to focus on. And Jesus says if we're going to follow him, we have to do that now. It requires us to go now. And the mission of Jesus is not one that could just sit on a back seat and we could just wait on. We have to be willing to go, and we have to be willing to let go of those things that are holding us back and holding us into the world. The cost of following Jesus might cut ties with other people in our lives, and we'll go about that in a little bit. But it's far better of a cost than sitting back and not following after Jesus. And then there's another area that we want to look at, and the rest of Luke chapter 61 and 62, it says this. It says, still another man. So another guy's coming to Jesus and says, I will follow you. But first, let me say goodbye to my family. And Jesus says, no one who puts a hand on the plow looks back and is fit for the service of the kingdom of God. And again, Jesus is I'm gosh, Jesus, you're just super harsh. Maybe he's just tired. It's the sun. It's the heat. He's just over the day. And I'm like, gosh, you're just harsh, right? The guy's making a simple request. Jesus, I'll follow you, but let me go say goodbye. Not an unreasonable request. Jesus wasn't like he was going home every single night to go say hi to family. So it seems like a reasonable request. But he's saying that anybody who goes back to the former things is not worthy of the service of God. And we cannot take our eyes off of Jesus. And that's what he's calling this guy to. And we see so many different examples of where people were looking forward and then they ended up looking backwards, right? We could look at Lot's wife with Sodom and Gomorrah, where, God tells them, hey, don't look backwards, look straight, we'll keep you protected. And what does Lot's wife do? She does everything what anybody else would do when they tell them not to do something. They're like, let's look backwards, right? We do that so many different times in our life where God calls us to do something and says, hey, keep looking forward and don't look at the things backwards. And we kind of just tend to look backwards and say, oh, look at that. And I'm not a farmer, if you could tell. No way would I be a farmer. But I do know some stuff about farming, right? So, if you're in a tractor, now, tractor equipment is, super nifty nowadays. My wife works for stuff like that, or did. It's super nifty. If they have, GPS where you don't even have to, control stuff anymore. Crazy. But if you don't have one of those fancy tractors and you're driving a tractor with a steering wheel, if you don't keep your eyes straight, what happens? You ain't going to have straight lines, right? You're going to be all over this. I was mowing grass yesterday, and I was, kind of distracted and just thinking, and I was, looked back, and I'm like, I can't wait till my grass grows a little taller so I can remow this because it looks bad. So, if we don't keep our eyes straight in the tractor or mowing, our lines aren't straight. And it's the same thing in our lives, right? If we don't keep our eyes on Jesus, then the path that we're going to take is not a straight one. It's going to be all over the road. It's going to be windy and curvy, and it's going to be crazy, and that's not what Jesus is calling us to do. The cost of following Jesus is not looking backwards. It's looking forward. And that's not always easy to do, right? Sometimes we're being called by God to go do something and to leave things that we're comfortable on to uncomfortable things and trying to keep our eyes focused on Jesus. It's really easy to look back to those things that we get comfortable with or those things that made us feel comfortable in life before. And so we begin to look back and see how stuff is, and we begin to kind of drift off the path a little bit, and a little bit more, and a little bit more, and before we know it, when we try to look back, our path is over here, and now we're way over here. And so Jesus is saying that we got to keep our focus on him. And so this morning, we looked at that, right? So the passage is saying that we got to get rid of our earthly securities. We got to get rid of those things that hold us into the world, and then we got to let go of the past. And so the question is how much is Jesus going to cost? How much are you willing to pay? Because we have to be willing to spend a little bit on Jesus, right? We got to give up some stuff. And we're being invited into this walk with Christ, but we have to be willing to give up some stuff that's going to potentially cost us. We can't be a complete follower of Jesus if we're hanging out on both sides of the fence, right? We can't be fully dedicated to Jesus, but still want to kind of like, I'll give you almost everything, but not quite everything. We got to be willing to give him everything. And that's really tough to do sometimes. It's really hard in our lives to be able to get rid of those things that we kind of cherish and hold on, and to be willing to give up and sacrifice those securities, right? One of the things I really admire about missionaries, which is why I could never be a missionary, is just the willing to depart of the comforts, right? They give up everything for some places, where they just give up all of their security, they give up everything so they can completely rely and trust on God. And what an amazing price that they pay. And I can never imagine doing something where, I'm being called to go out somewhere that could potentially cost me my life. I have friends who are missionaries in like China, and I have friends who've gone to Haiti and all sorts of places where Christianity is not looked well upon, who are willing to give up everything so that they could go spread the word of Jesus. And I look back, I'm a history guy myself, so boom. I look back at the early church, and I admire the early church. And just the lives that they had to live, in which the Romans and the world despised them. And yet they were willing to give up everything. I'm a big Roman history guy, so just even thinking about the Colosseums and Christians and the torture that they were having to put during that time. And so the question that we have to ask ourselves is, what am I willing to give up? What am I willing to give up to follow Jesus? As I mentioned, so I moved from Illinois to Iowa, and I was really comfortable, really comfortable. My wife and I had bought our first house. We had a lot of friends. I had a thriving youth ministry. I had what I thought was a really good, comfortable life. And then I felt God kind of tugging me into something new. And so I had to give up my career and my job so I could go and do what he asked me to do. It wasn't easy. Are we willing to do that? What if God is calling you away from America and go to China or another Islamic country or somewhere where Christianity is outlawed and we have to put our life online? What if God calls you to go to any inner city area to do a mission project or work with inner city youth and to show them the love of Jesus? Are we willing to do that? Because it's tough to say yes. What if God says, hey, we have to change our group of friends? The friends that we're hanging out with are just not great influences. Are we willing to do that? Are we willing to follow in the same footsteps as Jesus and rid ourselves of our earthly securities and those things that kind of hold us back? Or what if it's simply letting go of the things in the past and allowing God to forgive and to heal and restore you? What if it's that we're just continually dumping our lives and our energy into someone who's just not willing to accept the invitation for Jesus and allow someone else to carry on? I hope that we're willing to pay that price. What if we just give up everything in the past, our circumstances, our sin, our shame, our guilt, so that we can truly rely on Jesus? Following Jesus can be tough, and it can be costly. I remember when I was 15 and I became a Christian. And let me tell you something. I was an angry kid. Angry. And my friend got sick of hearing me just talk negatively about the church. So she invited me to church one Sunday, and I talked horrible things about her and her relationship with Jesus, and I said I would never do that. And so finally, after about 6 months, she's like, okay, seriously, like, tired of this? Come to church one time. If you don't like it, then you could say all the stuff that you want. So I walked a mile to church, and I said I would bash the church the whole way, and I walked to church, and I went to church, and I don't remember what the sermon was about. It wasn't that powerful of a sermon, but I walked home a mile, and I said, that's what I needed in my life. And 3 months later, I was baptized, and I gave up my life. And all of my friends and my family saw a difference. But I got ridiculed for it, because it was a complete 180 turn. And when I became time to choose college, I decided to go to Bible college instead of becoming a teacher. And my grandma, the first thing she said to me was, "That's really stupid. And why would you ever do something like that?" Like, she's like, "You're never going to make any money." And I said, "You're right, Grandma, I won't. And that's not why I'm going to college. And that's not what God called me to do." And I had so many friends in my life who tried to take me away from my relationship with Jesus. I had to cut them out, and it was tough. And I've had some family members in my life who I've had to cut out of my life because of my following Jesus is so much more important than their influence. Following Jesus is costly. We have to be willing to give up that price, no matter what. I was willing to pay that price to follow Jesus, and it hasn't always been easy. It's been tough sometimes. But I know that God has a bigger plan, and he has bigger things in store for me. And that cost is nothing compared to what I've given up. So, this morning, the question that I have to ask is, what is the price that you're willing to pay? What is the amount that you're willing to give up so that we can follow Jesus wholeheartedly? What price will you pay so that Jesus can be the center of your heart, can be the center of your life, so that others can see him in your life? So this morning, I allow you to consider that question. What is the price that I'm willing to pay? And my hope and my prayer is that unlike these three guys that we don't hear anything about, that would be joyful in giving up Jesus, giving up everything for Jesus, so that we could be joyful and we could make a pretty big impact. Let's pray. Father God, I'm just thankful for who you are. God, I'm so much in debt and so much in gratitude that you're so much bigger than what this world has to give and what this life has to bring, Lord, that I am grateful to give you everything. And so, Lord, this morning I ask that as we consider that cost, Lord, that we'd be willing and we'd be joyful to give you everything so that we can be able to show you as the centerpiece of our lives, Lord, that others can see that you're the center of our lives, and they would be willing to just be attracted to that and want to see what you're calling us to do. That we could see the joy that we have in the midst of this world that could greatly use some. So, Lord, I ask that we would just be willing to give up everything for you so that we would make you the center of our lives so that others can see you through us and they could also experience that joy. We love you, and we pray all this in your Son's name.